On this Sunday night, more tragedy from Hamas atrocities. Another Canadian confirmed dead after the horrific attacks on Israel. We speak with his mother in a Global News exclusive, the heartbreaking final messages between them.
Mommy, what's happening? Mommy, come on, what's going on? Mommy, what's happening?
Under bombardment and without aid, Gaza's worsening humanitarian crisis.
At the same time, we have staff who are in shelters who are not safe. It's very distressing.
The death and desperation among civilians as Israel's military prepares a major onslaught. Plus, thousands of Canadians in the region still at risk. The increasingly complicated task of getting them out.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. With each passing hour, the world is waiting for Israel's next move. On Sunday, more Israeli army tanks gathered on the border with Gaza as Israeli troops, for the moment, hold their ground before an expected all-out assault. Israel's wartime government held its first meeting. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it a show of unity within Israel to annihilate Hamas. What is not on hold is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Gazans continue to make their way south to what they hope is safety. But in reality, it is a region unable to provide even basic necessities. What adds to the desperation and anger is a convoy of humanitarian aid on the Egyptian side of the border at Rafah that cannot get across. There are conflicting accounts that Hamas or Israeli airstrikes are blocking the border. But whatever the reason, that border is closed and Canadians in Gaza cannot get out. We'll have more on that in a moment. But we begin tonight with news that a fifth Canadian has been identified among those killed in the attack by Hamas in Israel a week ago. Global's Jeff Semple spoke exclusively with his mother today, and he joins us now. Jeff, such dreadful news.
Eric, Netta Epstein was a skilled soccer player, gardener, who loved to brew his own beer and would put a Canadian maple leaf on the label. The 21-year-old is now the latest Canadian to be identified as a victim of Hamas.
This small, tight-knit Israeli community of Kfar Aza was one of the first to be attacked by Hamas. So when residents started hearing gunshots in the distance, they had no idea what was coming.
It was weird. We didn't really understand what was going on.
Ayala Chahar Epstein is Israeli-Canadian, her family originally from Montreal. But she grew up here near the Gaza border and is used to hearing the occasional air raid siren warning of a possible incoming rocket strike.
We know the drill very well. When the alarm goes off, we go into the safe room.
In the safe room, she started messaging her extended family members in the community, including her 21-year-old son, Netta, who lived in an apartment with his fiancée nearby.
So it starts at 7:55.
Ayala showed us her chat history from that morning. She asked her son to phone her.
Mommy, I can't call you. Okay, sweetheart, when you can.
Then Ayala received a message that her mother-in-law had been hurt. She ran over to their house down the street to find her mother-in-law shot to death.
The terrorists were there all over. They were killing people in neighbor houses. There's yelling in Arabic, and there's shooting, and there's mayhem outside.
She ran into the safe room and messaged her son Netta again.
And now I'm asking him, are they shooting in your neighborhood? Yes. And there's yelling in Hebrew, and there's massive shooting, and there's a car that's beeping all the time, and I don't understand what's going on. They're outside my apartment. So I write to him, okay, my sweetheart, just hold Iran tightly, I love you. And he sent me this big hearts. The last message I have from him is, Mommy, they're here.
Hamas gunmen broke into Netta's apartment where he and his fiancée Irene were hiding. Then they threw a grenade.
Very close to where she was, and Netta jumped on it to protect her.
The grenade detonated. Netta's fiancé remained hidden, and thankfully the gunman never saw her, and she managed to escape. Over a week later, crews are still recovering the dead from the community. Some of the bodies are rigged with explosives. Then, Sunday morning, the family finally received confirmation. Netta did not survive, nor did 3 other members of their extended family.
We were the targets. We, civilians,
This funeral held for another Israeli-Canadian, Adi Vitel Kaploun, the 33-year-old mother of 2 young children, killed defending her family.
She saved her father, she saved her children, she fought till the last moment.
This small community, population around 700, lost more than 50 people. More than a dozen others from here are missing and presumed Hamas hostages. Israel's president says they found Hamas militants carrying these jihad handbooks with instructions on how to kill, torture, and kidnap.
The people that live on our kibbutz are peace-loving people that hold their hands out for peace with the other side. And what has been done to us is slaughter.
There's growing speculation here that the military is working to rescue those Israeli hostages before launching its ground assault in Gaza. A military spokesperson told me today that the troops are ready to go and waiting for the government to make the call. Eric?
Jeff Semple in Jerusalem. Thank you, Jeff. As the humanitarian crisis grows in Gaza, Israel says it is restarting the water supply to parts of southern Gaza. It comes amid diplomatic pressure from the U.S. The Israelis had cut off water, electricity and food to Gaza following last weekend's surprise attack. And now a ground assault is imminent. Crystal Goomansingh is following the developments from Jerusalem tonight. And a warning, some of the details in her story are disturbing. Crystal?
Eric, UN aid agencies are deeply concerned about the spiraling humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees called the situation bone-chilling, saying it is on the brink of collapse. And that was on Friday. These are ice cream freezers, says Dr. Yasser Ali. Ice cream freezers containing the bodies of the dead. He says they're in such gruesome state they haven't been identified. Seemingly relentless strikes on Gaza means there's little time for people to dig out loved ones trapped under the rubble before another round of attacks begin and another run for help to a hospital that may or may not have supplies or power. The Gaza Health Ministry says more than 2,600 people have lost their lives in the past week. That number continues to climb. Doctors have been warning of the horrific conditions in hospitals. Too many patients, too few doctors, and not enough medical supplies. Global News has been speaking with Dr. Ghazi Abu Sitta at the main facility in Gaza. He shared this audio message update with us on Sunday.
The catastrophe in the hospital is just waiting to happen. There are tens of thousands of people who've sought refuge in the corridors, in the doorways, in the stairwell, everywhere you can imagine, every corner. And with the hygiene and with the unseasonably warm weather, this is a typhus or cholera epidemic waiting to happen.
Before Israel declared war, vowing to eliminate Hamas from Gaza, there was a high level of poverty and hunger in the enclave. Now, those with the World Food Program says even their staff need help.
We have staff who are in shelters, who are not safe, who call us and say, hey, can the bakeries that give food to the IDPs, can they also give us some food?
Humanitarian corridors are being negotiated, but so far aid is not getting in. Many are leaving what little they have in the north following Israel's warnings and heading south for their own protection.
I tried to evacuate my house.
We've been working with Aziz Al-Kahout in Gaza. He's finally been able to move his family a bit further south, but he did not find safety.
These are 3 houses targeted by Israeli forces, occupation forces. Not less than 100 persons under this destruction.
Civilians are never supposed to be targets in war. The UN has been calling for their protection. Agencies under the international banner are working together and are hopeful they'll be able to move in supplies soon.
We call for that unimpeded access because we need these 3 priorities and supplies, and the medical supplies, the water and the food. That's our priority as a community.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be back here in Israel Monday. The hope is that his swift return will mean good news for those stuck and suffering in Gaza. Eric?
Thanks, Crystal. Crystal Goomansingh in Jerusalem. More than 1,000 Canadians have now fled from Tel Aviv aboard military planes sent from Ottawa, but there are still thousands more seeking help. Canadians and their families stranded in both Israeli and Palestinian territory as the conflict escalates. Our Mackenzie Gray brings us the latest on the federal government's response from Parliament Hill.
Eric, as the situation becomes increasingly dire in Gaza, the number of Canadians looking for help out has doubled to 300.
We were hoping to have an opportunity for an exit through Rafah on Saturday, which sadly did not materialize.
That crossing is between Gaza and Egypt, the only way out of the Palestinian territory. There's no new timeline for a potential evacuation and only a partial explanation as to why no one was allowed to leave Saturday.
Hamas is probably playing some obstruction inside of Gaza as well, and is in some cases preventing the movement of some individuals inside Gaza.
Hamas's instructions conflicting with Israeli orders, the IDF telling over 1 million people in northern Gaza to flee south or get caught up in a potential ground invasion. To help the displaced, the Canadian government has pledged $10 million in aid, but no key supplies like water, food, or medicine have made it into Gaza. But if they do, Canadian officials say they won't go to Hamas.
We only deal with trusted, credible partners that are on the ground.
Enhanced diligence also advised to the 14,500 Canadians currently in Lebanon.
Canadians who are already in Lebanon should think about whether you really need to be there. And if you don't need to be there, you should consider leaving while commercial means are still available.
The federal government hoping to avoid a similar scene from when Lebanese military group Hezbollah and Israel were at war back in 2006. Ottawa sent cruise ships and planes to evacuate thousands of Canadians, similar to what's happening now in Tel Aviv, where an additional 2,300 Canadians want help to get out.
Our bridge from Tel Aviv to Athens is continuing. As I said today, 2 flights occurred today, 2 more are scheduled for tomorrow.
There is one positive. The Israeli government has given permission for approximately 250 Canadians to leave the West Bank. But Global Affairs is still waiting on approval from Jordan to let those Canadians cross into their territory. Eric?
Thanks, Mackenzie. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa.
Free, free, free Palestine!
Hundreds of people gathered on Parliament Hill for a pro-Palestinian march this afternoon. Signs reading, "Stop the siege on Gaza" and "Justice for Palestine," with demonstrators chanting, "End the occupation now," as they made their way to the Israeli embassy.
A lot of people have children on both sides, and this needs to stop. There needs to be peace.
Just a few hours later, in the same location, hundreds of marching in support of Israel. Many can be seen wearing Israeli flags as capes, and others holding posters with photos of those missing, while the crowd chants, "Bring them home." It's been nearly 72 hours since people in northern Gaza were given a day's warning to clear out and move south. But Israel has still not invaded. Joining us now is Mercedes Stevenson. Mercedes, what do you make of the apparent delay?
Eric, I haven't been surprised by the delay based on what Israeli and Canadian national security sources have been saying. For the Israelis, this isn't about a ticking clock. It's about having the conditions in place to win what could be a multi-front war. One of the most important conditions is accurate intelligence. After suffering such a massive intelligence failure that allowed the attack to happen, there has been extensive intel gathering underway, including through Special Forces raids into Gaza. Those Special Forces operators are looking for information about hostages, who may have ordered the attacks, and what kinds of weapons Hamas might have. Sources have told me that Hamas is believed to be sitting on a much larger and more sophisticated weapons cache than was previously assumed, and they are ready to fight. The IDF needs as much information as possible on where the hostages might be being held as well, so that they can deal with any potential booby traps that could be designed to kill them or Israeli troops during a rescue. Some American publications have stated that weather may also be a factor. The IDF has a greater advantage with clear skies for their drones and planes.
Mercedes, with skirmishes overnight on Israel's northern border, is there a risk of this spreading?
That's also part of what's taking time, Eric. The IDF has to figure out how to split its troops in case there is a two-front war, one with Hamas in Gaza and another potentially with Hezbollah, which is located across its northern border with Lebanon. Hezbollah is much bigger, much better armed, much more sophisticated, and much more deadly than Hamas. If Iran is backing Hezbollah and Hamas in these fights, Israel will be taking on an enemy with deep pockets and heavy weapons. Then there's the practicalities that have been taking time. Many of the reservists who've been called up have civilian jobs. They need to be armed, get up to speed on the training, and moved into place. Israel has also used this time to soften its target through the blockade of food, water, and humanitarian aid to Gaza, turning off the power, leaving chaos and making it difficult for the enemy to communicate in the hopes of weakening them. But that also has the effect of harming civilians, and that creates a deadline for international support for Israel. There's also an element of psychology here, the anticipatory anxiety of waiting to be attacked. When Israel moves, it will be sudden and aggressive, but it won't be determined by any publicly announced deadlines.
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thank you. Getting more people out of danger. Coming up, American diplomatic efforts to secure more aid for Gaza. Getting more than 1 million people, including hundreds of Canadians and Americans, out of harm's way in Gaza is a Herculean task. Today, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Egypt's Rafah border crossing will reopen. Blinken says Arab states do not want the crisis to spark a wider regional conflict. Joel Senick reports.
Life-saving supplies stalled at the border of Egypt and Gaza. More than 100 trucks filled with food, clothes, and medicine unable to cross. America's top diplomat is working to open up the passage as he remains in the Middle East.
We're determined to do everything we can to address the needs of people in Gaza. Civilians should not have to suffer for Hamas's atrocities.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says addressing the humanitarian crisis is a primary goal of his diplomatic mission. President Joe Biden reaffirming that on social media, saying America is working to ensure supplies reach civilians in Gaza as troops prepare for a ground offensive in the region.
The way that Israel does this matters. Needs to do it in a way that affirms the shared values that we have for human life and human dignity.
Officials are working to open up the crossing in the opposite direction as well. Hundreds of Canadians and Americans are currently in Gaza, hoping to travel into Egypt before the ground battle begins. The U.S. told its citizens to be near the border for a possible reopening this weekend, which never happened.
Hamas has intervened in some cases to make it hard for Palestinian Americans and others to be able to travel to the border crossing and get through.
The border crisis is turning into a complicated and pivotal part of the ongoing conflict. Secretary Blinken says he's working to broker a deal to move both aid and people. He's confident a solution can be reached as he now plans to travel back to Israel for more diplomatic talks on Monday. Joel Senick, Global News, Washington.
Still ahead, what's at stake for Poland in its crucial election? More anguish in Afghanistan after another powerful earthquake hit the country's western Herat province. The 6.3 magnitude quake flattened entire villages. Hundreds of people are feared dead. Herat has been hammered by a series of earthquakes in recent days, killing at least 1,000 people in the war-battered country. People in Poland went to the polls for their election today, and the country's opposition leader and the outgoing prime minister are both claiming victory. Exit polls suggest the ruling Law and Justice Party won the most votes, yet the country's coalition combinations may favor opposition parties. As Redmond Shannon reports, with implications for the war in Ukraine and European unity, today's vote is being called Poland's most important in decades.
Democracy has won, says Polish opposition leader Donald Tusk, after exit polls appear to give his party group and potential coalition partners the upper hand. While Jarosław Kaczyński of the ruling Law and Justice Party insists nothing has been decided yet, despite losing his parliamentary majority. Like so many elections these days, Poland's was fought on the culture wars, migration, abortion and LGBTQ2 rights. But Poles also faced a more fundamental choice just 32 years since its first post-communist election. The Law and Justice Party is socially conservative but leans left on public spending. The European Union has withheld funds to Poland over concerns about changes to the country's judicial system under the leadership of outgoing Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. Media freedom has been under scrutiny too.
Poland is a trendsetter in Europe. It was trendsetter towards democracy and EU enlargement 30 years ago, and now the pendulum of history turned into the opposite direction.
In the lead up to the election, Poland has threatened to stop sending arms to its ally and neighbour, Ukraine, in a dispute over grain imports. Tusk is a pro-European former Prime Minister. He told voters he will reverse the government's reforms to protect Poland's democracy.
We can be different, but we have to be one. And I'm fed up with the hatred.
The final outcome, however, could be decided by the exact number of seats won by the smaller parties. Coalition negotiations could take weeks before a government is formed. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, people around the world pay tribute to the victims of the violence between Israel and Hamas. The fighting in the Middle East could enter a new phase at any moment. Thousands have already died in both Israel and Gaza, and people are wondering when the violence will end. Tonight, we leave you with vigils from around the world, honoring the victims of this brutal conflict. Thank you for watching.